I used to think people who covered their windows at night were paranoid. Then I saw what my security camera recorded happening outside bedroom windows at 3 a.m. across America. There's something about a stranger standing perfectly still on your property that hits different than any horror movie. Real Reddit users have shared their most bone-chilling window encounters, and trust me, these aren't your typical, "I thought I saw something" stories. One homeowner couldn't believe their eyes when they spotted a figure in a dark hoodie just standing there, not walking, not looking around, just frozen like a statue on their front lawn. The person didn't move for over an hour. Think about that for a second. 60 whole minutes of someone staring at your house while you're trying to figure out what the hell is happening. The homeowner watched from behind their curtains, heart probably pounding. They couldn't see the stranger's face because of the hood, which somehow made everything worse. At least if you can see someone's face, you might guess their intentions. But a faceless figure, that's pure nightmare fuel right there. Here's where it gets even creepier. The stranger never spoke, never gestured, never did anything remotely normal. Most people would at least shift their weight or check their phone, not this person. They stood there like they were carved from stone, maintaining that unsettling stare toward the house. Makes you wonder what was going through their mind, doesn't it? The homeowner finally worked up the courage to call the police. Smart move, honestly. But here's the kicker. By the time officers arrived, the mysterious figure had vanished into thin air. No trace, no explanation, nothing. Just an empty lawn and a family that probably didn't sleep well for weeks. Well, this type of encounter really messes with your sense of security. Your home is supposed to be your safe space, right? Then some random person decides to turn your front yard into their personal observation deck. Everyone in that house felt completely vulnerable afterward, which makes perfect sense. Once you know someone can just walk onto your property and stand there for an hour without consequences, every shadow outside your window becomes suspicious. The interesting thing is how common this fear actually is. Tons of people online say that random trespassers are their absolute worst nightmare when it comes to nighttime scares. Not ghosts, not monsters, just real people being weird and unpredictable on their property. And the weird part is how the stranger's stillness made everything more terrifying. If someone's clearly trying to break in, at least you understand their motive. But standing motionless for an hour, that's either someone with serious mental health issues or someone planning something really bad. Neither option helps you sleep better at night. The hoodie detail keeps coming up in these stories too. Something about not being able to see someone's face automatically triggers our danger sensors. We're hardwired to read facial expressions for threat assessment, so when that's taken away our brains go into overdrive trying to figure out the risk level. But mysterious strangers are just the beginning of what people spot through their windows after dark. Wait until you hear about the faces that appear where they definitely shouldn't be able to reach. Here's where things get really unsettling. A teenage Redditor shared what happened when they were home alone one night, doing homework in their basement. Through the small window near their desk, they spotted something that made their blood run cold. A pale face was pressed directly against the glass, staring right at them. The face belonged to a complete stranger, someone who had no business being on their property, let alone peering into their basement at midnight. When their eyes met, the intruder didn't look away or try to hide. Instead they maintained eye contact for what felt like forever before suddenly vanishing into the darkness, gone without a trace. But here's what made this story even more chilling. That basement window was almost impossible to reach from outside. The person would have had to crawl on their hands and knees, navigate through thick bushes, and position themselves in an extremely awkward spot just to look inside. This wasn't some accidental encounter or case of mistaken identity. This was deliberate. Statistics actually show that most burglars flee immediately once they're spotted by homeowners. Makes sense, right? The last thing they want is to be identified or caught in the act. Yet something about faces at windows feels different. More personal, more threatening. It's one thing to know someone broke into your house when you weren't home. It's another thing entirely to lock eyes with them while they're watching you. The psychological impact lingers for years after these encounters. That same teenager mentioned they couldn't use their basement for months afterward. Every shadow outside that window became a potential threat. Every late-night study session turned into a paranoia-filled experience. Then there's the practical side most people don't consider. Basement windows are actually common targets for pranks, especially in suburban neighborhoods where teenagers think scaring their friends is hilarious. But actual intruders choosing basement windows, that's surprisingly rare. Most real break-ins happen through doors or ground-level windows that offer easy escape routes. The weird part is how these face-to-face encounters stick with people. Ask anyone who's experienced it, and they'll describe the exact details years later. The color of the person's eyes, whether they were smiling, how long the staring contest lasted. It's like our brains are hardwired to remember direct threats to our safety. What really gets under people's skin is the questions that never get answered. Who was this person? How long had they been watching before getting caught? Were they planning something worse? Or just getting some twisted entertainment from scaring a random teenager? Law enforcement takes these reports seriously because face-at-window incidents often escalate. Someone bold enough to press their face against your glass and maintain eye contact when spotted isn't exhibiting normal behavior. They're testing boundaries, seeing how you react, potentially planning their next move. Well, if mysterious faces weren't disturbing enough, wait until you hear what happens when the creatures watching you aren't even human. Animals usually run when they spot humans through windows. Not these ones. They stick around and stare back like they're studying you for a test. The stories get weird fast, and frankly, some of them might make you check your locks twice tonight. One Redditor couldn't sleep and wandered to their kitchen around 2 a.m. Through the window they spotted a coyote in their backyard. Normal enough, right? Well, this coyote was standing completely upright on its hind legs, like a person. It stayed that way for over 3 hours, just staring directly at the house. The homeowner grabbed their phone to record, but the second they lifted it, the coyote dropped to all fours and bolted. Rural areas report these kinds of strange animal encounters way more than cities. Makes you wonder what's really wandering around out there when we're all tucked inside. Then there's the owl situation that keeps popping up in these threads. Multiple people describe massive owls perching right outside their bedroom windows, completely motionless for hours. These aren't quick flybys, we're talking full horror movie stare-downs. One user said their owl visitor showed up every night for 2 weeks straight, always positioning itself where the porch light created the creepiest possible silhouette. Owls hunt at night, sure, but this behavior goes beyond normal predator patterns. Something about bright windows seems to fascinate them. But the raccoon stories, those hit different. Several users shared nearly identical experiences of raccoons using their tiny hands to tap on glass. Not scratching or clawing, actual rhythmic tapping like they're trying to get your attention. One person swore their raccoon visitor was making gestures, almost waving. The unsettling part isn't just the intelligence these animals show, it's how human-like those little hands look in the darkness. Your brain sees fingers moving outside your window at midnight, and doesn't immediately think cute woodland creature. Large animals appearing close to windows mess with kids especially hard. A family in Colorado dealt with a massive elk that started showing up outside their daughter's bedroom window every few nights. The elk would stand there for an hour or more, breathing heavily enough to fog the glass. Their 8-year-old refused to sleep in her room for months. Wildlife experts say elk behavior like this usually indicates territory disputes or mating season stress, but try explaining that to a terrified kid who thinks a monster is watching her sleep. And the weird part is how these animals seem to know exactly where people are inside the house. They don't just wander near buildings randomly, they position themselves at specific windows where they can make direct eye contact with whoever's inside. It's like they're choosing their audience. What makes these animal encounters different from human trespassers is the unpredictability. You can somewhat guess human motivations, but when a fox spends 4 hours staring at your living room window without blinking, all bets are off. Nature documentaries never prepared us for this kind of wildlife behavior. Speaking of staring contests, wait until you hear about the handprint stories. Some of these will make the animal encounters seem downright friendly, a single hand waving from behind a tree. That's all one Reddit user saw through their bedroom window at 2 a.m. Not a person, not a face. Just a pale hand slowly moving back and forth in the darkness, like it was saying goodbye to someone who'd already left. The creepy part, the hand kept waving for nearly 10 minutes straight. Who waves for 10 minutes? Your arm would get tired after 30 seconds, but this hand just kept going, methodical and patient, like it had all the time in the world. The homeowner grabbed their phone and called their neighbor the next morning. Hey, were you outside last night around 2? Nope, nobody should have been there. The tree sat right on the property line between 2 houses, and both families were sound asleep. Well, one family was trying to sleep while watching a disembodied hand perform the world's longest farewell. Then there's the physics problem. The tree trunk was thick enough to hide an entire person, sure, but why would someone stand perfectly still behind a tree for 10 minutes just to wave? It's not exactly threatening behavior, but it's definitely not normal either. Pranksters usually want to be seen. this felt different. Handprints on windows tell their own disturbing stories. Police reports show that potential burglars often test windows by pressing their palms against the glass, feeling for loose frames or checking if anyone's home. But hands appearing from behind trees? That's not standard break-in procedure. The weird part is how common these partial sightings actually are. Reddit threads are filled with people who've seen just pieces of intruders, a foot stepping behind a fence, an elbow poking out from a corner, a shoulder disappearing around a building. It's like these mysterious visitors are playing the world's most unsettling game of peekaboo. Security experts say partial sightings often happen because trespassers are testing boundaries. They want to see how close they can get without being fully spotted. Makes sense, right? But a waving hand seems more like someone saying hello than someone casing your house. Some users shared similar experiences in the comments. One person saw fingers drumming against their mailbox post at midnight. Another caught someone's hand reaching over their back fence, just hanging there motionless for several minutes before pulling back. These aren't the calculated movements of criminals. They're just plain weird. Local police departments report that hand-related window incidents spike during certain times of year. Halloween brings obvious pranksters, but spring and summer see more unexplained cases. Warmer weather means more people walking around at night, and apparently some of them really enjoy giving strangers a friendly wave from behind their landscaping. The most unsettling thing about hand sightings, they feel personal. A shadowy figure could be anyone passing by, but a hand making deliberate gestures feels like someone's trying to communicate specifically with you. What message were they trying to send with that endless wave? But hands at windows are just the beginning of truly bizarre midnight encounters. Wait until you hear about the children. Nothing hits quite like spotting a lone child outside your window when the rest of the world sleeps. Multiple Reddit users shared chilling encounters with young kids appearing at their homes near midnight, dressed completely wrong for the weather and refusing to speak when questioned. One person described a little girl in a summer dress standing on their porch during a snowstorm, just staring through the glass without making any sound. The temperature was below freezing. She wore no coat or shoes. When they opened the door to help, she simply walked away into the darkness and vanished. But here's what makes these stories even stranger. These children never seem lost or scared. They appear calm, almost unnaturally so. One father in Colorado shared how a boy around 8 years old knocked on their sliding glass door at 2 a.m., wearing only shorts and a t-shirt in October weather. The kid didn't cry, didn't ask for help, didn't even look cold. He just stood there with this blank expression until the family called police. Law enforcement actually encounters this more than you'd think. Officers report finding wandering children who can't or won't explain where they came from. Sometimes these kids are genuinely lost, suffering from medical conditions or running from dangerous home situations. Makes sense, right? Children in crisis might seek the first safe house they see. Well, here's where it gets weird. Several users mentioned the same unsettling detail. These midnight visitors often knew things they shouldn't. One woman in Texas described a little girl who appeared at her kitchen window and somehow knew her daughter's name, even though her daughter was sleeping upstairs and they'd never seen this child before. Parents find these encounters particularly disturbing, because every instinct screams to help a child in need, but something feels fundamentally wrong about the situation. The silence is what gets to most people. Normal kids would be crying, asking for mom and dad, or showing some kind of emotion. These children just watch and wait. Then there's the timing factor that nobody talks about. Why do these sightings cluster around the same hours, usually between midnight and 3 a.m.? Child psychologists explain that kids experiencing trauma sometimes develop unusual sleep patterns and might wander during these late hours. But that doesn't explain how they end up miles from home, or why they seem to target random houses. One detail that keeps popping up in these stories is how quickly these children disappear when adults try to approach or help them. They don't run frantically like scared kids normally would. They just calmly walk away and seem to dissolve into the night. Security cameras rarely catch where they go, which only adds to the mystery. The most unsettling part might be what happens afterward. Many families report feeling watched for weeks following these encounters, as if something invisible lingers around their property. Some even claim to see the same child again months later, looking exactly the same age and wearing identical clothes. But mysterious children aren't the only figures that seem to defy explanation when spotted through windows at night. Sometimes what people see doesn't have a clear human form at all. Movement catches your eye differently at night. Your brain processes shadows completely differently when darkness falls, making every flicker feel like a potential threat. That's exactly what made these shadow encounters so disturbing for Reddit users who couldn't shake what they witnessed outside their windows. One user described watching a tall, formless shadow glide past their bedroom window around 2 a.m. The shadow had no clear human shape, too elongated, too fluid. It moved with purpose but made zero sound on the gravel driveway below. When they checked security footage the next morning, absolutely nothing appeared on camera during that exact time frame. Their motion sensors never triggered either, but here's where shadow sightings get really strange. Multiple people report seeing the same shadow figure return night after night, always following identical patterns. One homeowner in Ohio tracked a recurring shadow for 2 weeks straight. Same time, same route, same unnaturally smooth movement. They eventually discovered a neighbor's new security light was casting shadows from passing cars onto their property. Mystery solved, right? Well, not exactly. The weird part is how these shadows behave differently than normal ones. Regular shadows from cars or people have predictable movement. They follow the light source and object creating them. These reported shadows seem to pause, change direction, or move independently of any visible cause. Then there's the psychological element nobody talks about. Our brains are wired to detect human shapes in darkness as a survival mechanism. Sometimes this works too well, creating false positives that feel absolutely real in the moment. Sleep researchers found that people see unexplained shadows most frequently during their natural circadian low points, typically between 2 and 4 a.m. when alertness drops, but anxiety peaks. Security experts actually use shadow behavior to identify real intruders versus false alarms. Professional burglars know how to move to minimize their shadow projection, staying close to walls and avoiding direct light paths. Random trespassers or curious neighbors usually create obvious human-shaped shadows that move predictably. Let's not forget the environmental factors that create shadow chaos. Overgrown trees, swaying power lines, and even large insects flying near outdoor lights can produce shadows that appear much larger and more menacing than their sources. One family spent months terrified of a recurring giant shadow creature that turned out to be a barn owl with an 8-foot wingspan hunting mice near their porch light. The most unsettling shadow stories involve multiple witnesses seeing identical figures. 3 separate families on the same street reported the same tall, thin shadow moving between houses every Tuesday night for a month. Police investigations revealed a local teenager had been sneaking out weekly to meet friends, taking a specific route to avoid streetlights. His timing was so consistent that neighbors began expecting his shadow appearance. Security lighting actually reduces shadow-related reports by about 60% according to police data. Proper illumination eliminates the stark contrasts that create dramatic shadow effects. But some homeowners prefer keeping certain areas dimly lit for privacy, unknowingly creating perfect conditions for shadow confusion. Speaking of things that appear and disappear without explanation, wait until you hear about the floating lights that have people questioning everything they thought they knew about physics. The night sky has always held mysteries, but when glowing orbs start dancing outside your bedroom window, things get personal real quick. Reddit users have shared dozens of stories about unexplained floating lights that appear from nowhere and vanish just as mysteriously. These aren't your typical streetlight reflections or car headlights passing by. One user described watching 3 bright orbs moving in perfect formation outside their second-story window. They hovered for nearly 20 minutes, pulsing with a soft white light that seemed almost alive. The weird part? No sound whatsoever. Helicopters make noise. Planes make noise. Even drones buzz like angry wasps. But these lights moved in complete silence. Another person reported seeing a single red orb that would appear every few nights around 2 a.m., always in the same spot above their neighbor's roof. It would bob up and down like it was floating on invisible water, then shoot straight up and disappear. They watched this happen for weeks before finally asking their neighbor about it. Plot twist: the neighbor had been seeing it too, but thought they were going crazy. Let's not forget the practical explanations that usually solve these mysteries. Modern pranksters have gotten creative with drones equipped with LED strips. Some of these gadgets are nearly silent and can create impressive light shows that fool even experienced observers. Weather balloons with attached lights sometimes break free and drift at low altitudes, creating that classic floating orb effect that has people reaching for their phones. Then there's the science behind why floating lights seem so common during foggy or rainy nights. Well, moisture in the air acts like a natural projector screen, making distant lights appear closer and more defined than they actually are. Street lamps several blocks away can create the illusion of mysterious orbs hovering just outside your window. Add some wind moving the fog around, and suddenly that boring streetlight looks like it's dancing through the air. But here's where things get interesting. Not every floating light has a neat explanation. Professional pilots report seeing unexplained aerial phenomena regularly, and some of these sightings happen at low altitudes in residential areas. The military has acknowledged that some aerial objects remain genuinely unidentified, even after thorough investigation. Insects also play tricks on our eyes more often than you'd expect. Fireflies photographed with slow shutter speeds create streaking light trails that look supernatural. Large moths flying near porch lights can appear as moving orbs when viewed from inside through window glass. The human brain loves to fill in gaps and create patterns where none exist, especially when we're tired or stressed. Cultural myths about floating lights exist worldwide for good reason. People have been seeing unexplained aerial phenomena for centuries. Will-o'-the-wisps, ghost lights, fairy orbs, every culture has names for these mysterious sightings. Whether they're natural gas emissions, atmospheric electrical phenomena, or something else entirely, they've been freaking people out long before Reddit existed. Well, most floating light sightings turn out to have mundane explanations, but that small percentage of genuinely unexplained cases keeps the mystery alive. Sometimes the most unsettling encounters aren't about mysterious orbs floating outside your window, they're about the eyes that watch you watching them. There's something primal about eyes staring back at you in the dark. Your brain immediately knows something's wrong, even before you can process what you're looking at. One Reddit user described seeing two glowing orbs outside their kitchen window around 2 a.m., perfectly still, just watching. The eyes didn't move for what felt like an entire hour. The person grabbed their phone to call someone, anyone, but when they looked back up, the eyes had vanished completely. No sound, no movement, just gone. What makes this even stranger? Those eyes were positioned about 7 feet off the ground. Most people don't realize that animals have a special layer in their eyes called the tapetum lucidum. Fancy name, but it basically acts like a mirror that reflects light back through the retina. That's why deer, raccoons and cats seem to have glowing eyes at night. Their eyes aren't actually producing light, they're bouncing it right back at you. But here's where things get interesting. Different animals produce different colored eyeshine. Deer typically show up as bright white or blue. Raccoons flash yellow or orange. Cats usually glow green or yellow. Dogs can range from blue to green. Knowing this might help you identify what's watching you, but it doesn't make the experience any less unsettling. Then there are the cases that don't quite add up. Multiple users reported seeing red glowing eyes that stayed perfectly motionless for extended periods. Red eyeshine is extremely rare in most wildlife. Some nocturnal birds can produce red reflections, but they rarely remain stationary long enough to stare. Makes you wonder what else might be out there watching from the darkness. Pets often detect these nighttime visitors long before humans do. Dogs will suddenly start barking at windows for no apparent reason. Cats will sit perfectly still, staring intensely at something outside that you can't see. Their hearing is significantly better than ours, and they can pick up movements we'd never notice. When your pet starts acting strange near a window, there's probably something worth investigating. The psychological impact hits differently than other window encounters. While seeing a person outside is obviously threatening, spotting unknown eyes triggers something deeper. We've evolved to recognize when we're being hunted or studied. Those ancient survival instincts kick in immediately, flooding your system with adrenaline, even if the eyes belong to a harmless opossum. Distance makes everything worse too. Eyes that appear close to the window suggest a smaller animal, probably curious about indoor lights or food smells. But eyes positioned far back in the darkness, that indicates something large enough to maintain that distance while still being visible. Something that doesn't need to get close to see you clearly. What really gets under people's skin is the intelligence behind some of these encounters. Several users mentioned that the eyes seem to track their movement around the room, not just random animal behavior, but deliberate observation. Almost like whatever was out there was studying them, learning their patterns, waiting for the right moment to make its next move.